Yep, I'll share the recording. So, greetings, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I often get my days confused because the weeks go by so fast. Really excited to welcome Jeff Hyman to the show today. Actually, I'm not doing my podcast here, but to the webinar this morning. And today's focus is recruiting. So in a second, we'll have Jeff share slides, go through the info. But again, with a lot of these, very actionable, a lot of information. Jeff will have a lot of slides, a lot of great content. So we'll go through it kind of fast, but then we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. So let me do a formal introduction of Jeff, and then we'll get rolling here. So Jeff launched his recruiting career at Heidrick and Struggles and Spencer Stewart, two firms I know well, huge global executive search firms. Today, he's CEO of Chicago-based Recruit Rockstars. Along the way, Jeff has created 4 companies backed by $50 million in venture capital, has 25 years of recruiting, plus wrote a best-selling book called Recruit Rockstars, which you will receive a copy at the end of the webinar today. He also hosts the 5-Star Recruit Rockstars podcast and is featured by CNBC, Fortune, Forbes, and holds a degree from Kellogg School of Management and the Wharton School. So, Jeff, thanks for joining today.
No, it's my pleasure, and I just love doing these type of sessions, especially with an intimate group, because, like you said, we can do as much Q&A as you want towards the end. So maybe just a quick audio video check first. I'm going to share my screen, and then once we do, I just want to make sure that everyone can hear and see me okay. Is that good?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah,
yep. We see the slides.
Good.
Looks good.
Good. So, well, thanks again, Ben, for having me. Very honored to be asked, and I promise you that over the next hour, I will share with you a no BS assessment of where the market is from a recruiting perspective, and share with you what I've learned the hard way in many cases over the past 25 years. As Ben mentioned, you're going to get a free copy of our book. So rather than scrambling to write everything down that we're going to go through, I'd encourage you to just really immerse yourself in it and tune out all the social media and all the emails and all the noise for an hour. And I say that because as probably one of the older folks on this call, I can assure you that the team that you build in your business, whether it's a SaaS company or anything else, is going to be the biggest difference maker. A lot of people think it's product market fit, or does the SaaS platform work properly, or pricing model. And I can tell you that's all noise. What is going to make the difference between you doing well, particularly in a challenging market over the next, what I think is going to be the next couple of years, and others who fail, is going to be the team that you build. The exciting part is that this is the first time that I can remember in about 13 years where you can get your hands on some great talent. I'm not saying it's easy, but we've been in a war for talent the past 13 years that I've never seen before. And for the first time in a while, you can actually recruit some outstanding difference makers to your company. And that's really what we're going to talk about. So we'll do that over the next 35 minutes. And then, Ben's been very generous, and he's put together kind of a special idea for you all that I'll share with you. And then we'll open it up for as much Q&A as you want to do. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, and Ben, I love taking questions as we go. So
Yep.
As they come in, I can't see the chat, but you just interrupt me. Please don't worry about it, and let's have it.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds good. I'll monitor the chat. So throw any questions in the chat,
Yeah.
and we'll take a few along the way and then answer a bunch at the end.
So my goal is to help you avoid bad hires. And why do I say that? Unfortunately, 1 out of every 2 new hires fails. This study is been repeated many times. It's true across countries, industries, functions, job levels. Most people are miserable when it comes to hiring. You can basically flip a coin and get the same results in your hiring if you're like most people. And it's really hard to scale a business successfully that way if you've got a revolving door of people that you're hiring and then letting go, or even worse, you hire them and then you keep them if they're B or C players. And so my goal over the next hour is to help you avoid that. I've seen companies and leaders transform from a 50% batting average to a 90% batting average. No one's going to be perfect. That's impossible because we're dealing with humans and psychology and behavior. We'll touch on that in a few minutes. But if you master this skill, and it is a skill just like learning how to build a macro in an Excel spreadsheet, you will be 90% accurate and far ahead of the game in terms of scaling your business and crushing your competitors, not to mention impressing your investors. So that's our goal. Um, while what I said is true, it is becoming a little easier to recruit. I'm not going to lie to you, it's still really hard. We are at a 50-year low unemployment rate, at least here in the US, and that's true in many markets around the world. And it's not going to improve dramatically anytime soon. We've gone through a macro change. If you look at baby boomers that have aged out of the workforce, people that have left the workforce due to COVID, changes in immigration patterns, all kinds of stuff. We're going to be in a tight labor supply for quite some time. But again, your competitors stink at this. And so if you can master this skill like any other, you'll really have a leg up. Now, recruiting is one of these things that a lot of people think is very squishy, and I'm not a squishy kind of guy. So I like to think of it just like a CFO would or a CEO. What is a rock star? How do we know when we've hired a top performer? And so I've found that there are three key elements, all of which must be true, to find a top performer. And that is someone who's in the top 5% of the talent available at the price we can afford. And all three conditions must be met. They're in the top 5%, so they're not above average, they're not top 20%. They're a game changer in the top 5%. And I'm going to teach you how to find those people that are available, right? So if you're looking for someone in New York and she's in San Francisco, she's not available, right? So you have to think about geographically and also find people that are interested and at the price we can afford. We all have a price point. It's important to know your price point that you can afford and be prepared to spend that money and find the best possible person you can find with that budget in mind. So again, we'll talk about how to do this. Okay, so let's get into it. So over the past 25 years, I have found that there are 10 essential things, 10 mistakes that most people make. I've hired thousands of people, I've interviewed tens of thousands of people, and I've tracked over time the mistakes that I made, and I've made plenty early in my career. And they fell into about 10 general patterns, and I've verified this with many people that I've worked with, clients I've worked with over the years. And so the best-selling book, which you're going to get a copy of, kind of dissects each of those 10 mistakes and gives you the diagnosis. Now, on this call, we're going to cover the first six. I'll leave the last four to the book, and you can kind of read those at your leisure. I happen to think the first six are really the game changers. And we're going to dive right in and go to number one, which is the scorecard. So this is probably the biggest mistake that people make, which is that most people have no idea what they're looking for. I'll know it when I see it. I'm too busy to put together a scorecard. I don't have the time to put together a scorecard. I don't want to. Or internally, we're not in agreement on what it is we're looking for, and we'll figure it out when we find that person. They'll just blow us away and we'll kind of come together. And that's a losing strategy. That will ensure that you're only 50% accurate. What does work and what you must learn to do is gain agreement on the scorecard up front. I call this go slow to go fast. Your recruiting process will go so much easier and so much faster if you just invest some time, and I'm talking 30, 60 minutes, to get agreement on the scorecard. In a minute, I'll show you how to build one. Now, you'll note that it says all four interviewers. And the reason four is the magic number is I've seen companies that it's one person who makes the decision. And I've seen companies, believe it or not, as high as 30 people involved in the interview process. And you can imagine what candidates think of that. Turns out that Google did a long-term longitudinal study, and they found that four was the optimal number of interviewers. With each additional interviewer, you only get 1% more accurate. So that's the number you want to target. Now, of course, who you select as interviewers is super important, and the book talks about my recommendations on how to identify those people. So here's how to build a scorecard, and I'll just kind of take it one at a time. It's a very simple process. First, you picture what success looks like in the role. Doesn't matter if it's a controller, a head of sales, or a junior sales rep, it's all the same. And you identify what it is that this person is going to do if they just crush this role, right? They're going to double the quota or whatever it is. Second, what are the accountabilities, the day-to-day accountabilities that someone would have to discharge or execute in order to achieve that level of success. It might be a list of 10, 20, 30 things. The sales rep has to log stuff in CRM. They got to make 50 calls a day. They need to overcome objections, et cetera, et cetera. The next step is to identify the competencies, the skill sets that someone would need to have in order to discharge those daily responsibilities successfully, which would then ladder up to success in the role. Okay, so now we know what skills they need. We don't care where they got those skills. We just know what the skills are. This is a big mistake. This is where most people say they take a shortcut, right? They say 5 to 10 years of experience in SaaS sales or whatever. Well, that's not really a very good predictor, as it turns out. But if I take the time to identify the competencies and skills, that actually is a predictor. We then go to DNA, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we're going to score objectively each candidate. I use 1 to 10. You can use 1 to 100, A to F. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. The key is to never settle for anything below an 8. Now, you almost never find a 10. It almost never happens. But if you can fill your companies with 8s and 9s, rock stars in every position, people that are available at the compensation level you can afford, you will be unstoppable. And where most people run into trouble is they're so desperate that they settle for a 5, a 6, a 7. As soon as you let that mediocrity into the company, you're doomed from the start. So that's how you build a scorecard. The book fleshes it out in a lot more detail, and we can cover it in Q&A. I'll give you one quick tip, and then we'll go to the next step. I've learned not to target candidates who are currently earning the same amount that I can afford to pay. What you are almost guaranteed of doing is recruiting a B player. Because think about it, why would that person make this change? Instead, we're going to go one notch down. We're going to find that top performer for whom this is a big move, not just in compensation, but in responsibility, maybe title, exposure, etc. It is a substantial career move. I call it a 20% difference. And you are almost assured of finding that top performer. So if I'm looking for a CMO, I'm not looking for someone who's currently a CMO. I look for someone who's currently a VP of marketing or a senior director of marketing who's kicking ass and who would see this as an enormous opportunity. Much, much safer bet, ironically, than picking the currently sitting person. Okay,
And Jeff,
let's move on.
I have a real quick question about that. That's
Yeah,
really interesting.
sure.
I mean, what about, like, I could see that early stage, but what if you're a 100 million AR company and we've got to fill a CMO? Are we saying I don't want to see a CMO title, someone who's moving up to CMO, or where does that maybe not always applicable?
I wish I could say that it's not applicable, but it applies across everything. So let's say we're a 100 million SaaS company. I still have a budget on what I can afford to pay. So it turns out the titles are not very predictive. Think about it. Companies throw around titles like water, right? So just because someone's a CMO now doesn't mean they're going to be a successful CMO at my company. But what's more important is if the person is a sitting CMO making the same compensation and they're kicking ass, they're going to be very hard to recruit. I'm probably going to have to break my budget, which I assume we can't do, right? We're a lot of CFOs on this call. So instead, people move on average in the US at least for an 18% difference on average. So that's the statistic, right? If I can offer that kind of magnitude difference, people will make the move. And so it turns out the better value is to discover the undiscovered talent before someone else does and increase and give them that increase.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that angle. Yeah.
Let's go to DNA. Number 2, I kind of put a pin in this for a minute, but it is equally important. So I weight the scorecard as 50% competencies and 50% DNA. Very different than earlier in my career. I used to be kind of 80-20. And I've learned that DNA is equally important. What do I mean by DNA? Well, first, what most people do is they take shortcuts, like I just said. They focus on things like titles, or the person worked at Google, so they must be super smart, or they went to Stanford, so they must be accomplished, etc. These are clues that a person can be successful. Turns out studies show that they're not highly predictive. I went to Wharton and Kellogg, and there's plenty of people from my class that I wouldn't hire for a certain role, but at a different company, in a different context, I would. So it turns out it's just not a great predictor. What is the single best predictor in recruiting is DNA. DNA is the key predictor of what is. I think there's some noise, Ben. You might want to
Yeah,
mute
here
some of the
yeah.
lines. Yeah. Um,
Oops. Oops, Jeff, I muted you. Sorry. There we go. Can we back on, Jeff? Shoot. 1 second. Hey, Jeff, I'm sending a message your way to turn your mic back on.
it is back on.
Yep, there we go. Okay, we're good.
Okay. I was going to start doing it in mime.
Yeah.
Can you still see my screen?
Yep. We're on
Great.
the 90% accuracy.
Awesome. So what do I mean by DNA? Obviously, I'm not referring to DNA, which we all know scientifically determines how tall we're going to be or our eye color, etc. What I'm talking about is that psychologists have concluded that by age 8, we as humans we are the person that we're going to become. And if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. If you're going to be funny or creative or attention to detail, or if you're going to be musical or ironic or organized, these inherent characteristics and traits are deeply embedded by the time that we're 8, barring any kind of life-changing trauma. And so rather than babysit and micromanage a team and try to get them to perform the day-to-day tasks that we want to, it's far easier to find someone who's already predetermined to perform those tasks naturally, right? So there are people you would hire for a controller role. They have attention to detail, they're perfectionists, etc. But you would never hire that kind of person for a different type of role. And you wouldn't want to hire someone with a great creativity and poor attention to detail, but they're amazing at other things for a controller role. And so DNA, as it turns out, is the single best predictor. Now, the book talks through how to identify your company's unique DNA. You could think about an ad agency and a biotech company. They're going to have completely different types of DNAs, right? It's important that you identify early on, by the way, and the earlier the better, your specific DNA. And I can assure you, if you already have 3 people, you've got a DNA in your team, whether you know it or not. The key is to articulate it in words so that you can then operationalize it and use it. What do I mean? I mean, over communicate it with your team every time, every opportunity, so they understand why they're there and what you expect of them. It's important from a recruiting perspective so that you never hire someone who is fundamentally going to be a DNA mismatch. You're going to be micromanaging that person forever, which is not sustainable. You'll need to exit bad hires, I should say mishires, where they fooled you for whatever reason. You made a mishire, bad DNA match. You want to exit those people as soon as possible. And you may have some people on your team today who make the number every quarter, but you know in your heart they're a bad DNA match. They need to go. And then, of course, you need to live the DNA of the company too. So you can't do these things until you put words against it. And again, the book has a framework to do that. Okay, so we've identified a scorecard. Half is competency, skills, ability to do the job, and half is DNA, ability to be successful in our specific company. Once you hire someone who is an 8 or higher on those 2 dimensions, you're halfway home, right? Sounds easy. It's simple, but not easy. And we're going
And
to
Jeff,
continue to, yeah, please.
yeah, we have a couple questions here. Let's pause for a second.
Please.
Marnie has a
Yeah, let's do
question.
it. Love it.
Yeah, do you have any tips for understanding a candidate's current salary? In parens, some states prohibit the question.
Yeah.
So, in your
Yeah.
experience, how have you kind of figured out maybe where their salary level is to figure out, all right, I want to hire people who are up and coming?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So there's two elements to that. First is to target people who are likely earning what I can afford. So rather than, to use your CMO example, Ben, rather than going after CMOs, I go after VPs of marketing, and I can understand using publicly available data or even just common sense that they're going to be less expensive. But then more importantly, I discuss compensation on the very first call with every single candidate. I am not going to waste my time on a whole process only to find out at the 11th hour that she's 50,000 more than I can possibly afford. I want to know on the first call. And in a few minutes when we get to step 5, I'll tell you how to do that.
And then, Digga, we'll get to your question. Then Jim has a question on the DNA, which we just talked about. How can we help hiring managers understand their team DNA, which I'm guessing is, say, finance, right? What makes finance tick currently in the company? What's the culture? What's their DNA? I assume, Jim. And then, then how do we
Yeah.
apply that to finding similar DNAs?
Yeah. So just to be clear, there are two ways to think about DNA. And I don't want to go through down a rabbit hole here with the time that we have, but I generally have found that DNA is thought about at a company level. If you're 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, your team shares a DNA. It's vital to understand what that DNA is. The DNA is not role specific, it's company specific. Once your company gets to a certain size, General Electric, for example, different divisions are going to have different DNA. So I do it on a division level.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about a functional or departmental DNA. I'm talking about a company.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Should we keep going?
Yeah, let's keep rolling.
Great. So now we know what we're looking for, right? We've got it on paper. I know the competencies and I know the DNA of the person I'm looking for. Now I got to find them. But believe it or not, that's a little easier if you have the first two figured out. And so we'll go to the job invitation. What is a job invitation? You probably know the term job description. The problem is most people come up with a crappy job description. It's boring, it's restrictive. It is the least effective document you'd want to put in front of a candidate and get them excited about the role. So instead, what you're going to do is develop an engaging, exciting, maybe even funny job invitation that invites people to have a confidential conversation with you. Believe it or not, I'll give you a hint. Chat GPT can help you. It can do it in about 10 seconds, but we'll talk about that later. But again, this is going to be a big differentiator because we're only going after top performers, right? We're not talking to anybody else. So why would a top performer be interested in this position? Unfortunately, most job descriptions look like this. It's a bullet point list of requirements and it's like a hostage negotiation letter. You must do this, you must do this, you must do this. You will not attract top performers to your positions. Now, there are four pieces that must be in your job invitation. The industry, because many of the candidates you're going to talk to are from outside the industry. So why should they invest the next 5 years in your industry? Your company, right? Your funding, your stature, your awards, whatever. The hiring manager. Number one reason people quit is their boss. So you need to convince them that they're going to have an amazing boss. And then finally, the role. What is the job? You need to cover all four. Most job descriptions only have number four, and you want to have all four pieces. And change your mindset from an apply now mindset, which is going after active job seekers, which is the vast minority of people. When you're at a 3.5% unemployment market, I want to talk to the 97% who are not actively looking for a job. So you got to shift your mindset from an apply now to a let's talk, right? Let's have a conversation. And the job invitation helps you do that. Many job descriptions have way too many must have requirements. Harvard Business Review did a study 10 years ago, and they found that 97% of women and 80% of men will not engage in a conversation if they don't believe that they meet all those must haves. Why is that? They don't want to waste their time, right? They're like, well, this says MBA required. I don't have an MBA, so I'm not going to go for it. Well, turns out that an MBA wasn't required. The boss just said, I'm going to throw that in there. So think really hard about your must haves and keep that list super short. Okay. Forget about the nice to haves. It needs to be written for the candidate, not the employer. Okay. This is an advertisement. I recommend a copywriter or Chat GPT to write these, not your HR leader who's not a great copywriter. And most of them, let's be honest, are super boring, right? So the bad news is that, like I said, most people are currently employed. Here's the great news. We're also at a record high level of employee disengagement. Most people are miserable in their role for a lot of reasons, many of which you know, and are open to a conversation as long as you can get your job invitation in front of them. And I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. Okay. So record low unemployment and record high employee disengagement. There's some arbitrage to be done here, as you can tell. But it doesn't happen by posting on a job board. Talk about that in a minute. What do they want to see in the job ad or the job invitation? They want to understand your culture, what it's like to work there, the DNA of the place, and finding a personal connection to your company's mission, your brand, etc. Easy to do when you're a solar company that's going to save the planet. A little harder to do when you're producing, you know, air filtration systems. But again, you have to go to the personal connection. Why should someone care? Well, their kid has asthma, and that makes them interested in an air purification company. So find that personal connection. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. We're going to go to number 4. How are we going to find these people? Well, I know that you're going to hate this, but I promise to make it painless for you. It's networking. It's networking. That's how you're going to find your people. And you might say, well, we're only 10 people. So, of course, you find your people through networking. You should continue to find your best people through networking. Unfortunately, what most people do is post and pray on ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, Indeed. It's a $15 billion industry, the job board industry in the US, and it doesn't work. You will pay $300, you will get 1,000 applicants, and if you're lucky, you'll find 2 or 3 who are even worth a conversation. And it's not to say all the rest are bad. It's just there's no filter, right? They can automatically apply. They don't even have to click anything. So basically, you're getting the unwashed masses. Instead, networking is the way to do it. And specifically, your personal network, your employees' networks, and learning how to use LinkedIn advanced search, which doesn't mean posting on LinkedIn. It means going out to those 850 million profiles in the right way. But I'm going to specifically focus on one of these. So I think about yield, and those of you who are financially inclined will kind of think about it this way. Job postings, you might get 300 applicants. A lot of times you'll get over 1,000. If you're lucky, 2 are worth talking to, and very few actually result in a hire. Proactive search, which is inverting the process, going out to the market and finding 100 people who seem to fit the requirements. Remember, most of them are open to a conversation, so it'll result in 20 great conversations and a couple of great hires. But the single best way to do this is employer referrals. You only need to talk to 10 to get 2 great hires. It's the best use of your time. In fact, studies verify this. What's the source of most of your candidates? Most companies say job boards. But when you say and ask them, what is the source of your best candidates? It's inverted, and it's employee referrals. If you don't have an employee referral program that's properly designed and overly communicated to your team and your board and your investors and everyone around your company, your vendors, your partners, I include all those people in your employee referral program. The best part is data shows that it doesn't even matter how much you pay. It's not about paying 5,000, 10,000. It's about how often you talk about your program. That's the key driver. But your employee referral program is your single best source of candidates, and specifically your best candidates. The reason for that is super simple. It's highly likely that the people that you've already hired and are doing well, otherwise you would have exited them, which we'll talk about in a minute, they share the same DNA with the people that they hang around with. So it's kind of a shortcut to find people that share a similar DNA to the people already in your company and doing well. So I love employee referral programs because it's kind of the holy grail of hiring, right? It's been proven to be the fastest, the cheapest, and the best. Highest referral rate, employee retention rate. It's the cheapest way to go, far cheaper than a headhunter, and it's actually the fastest. But again, the key driver is to talk about it over and over and over. About 2/3 of companies in the US have an employee referral program. So if you're one of the 1/3, you better set one up, and the book talks you through how to do that. But of the 2/3 that have a program, most of them never talk about it. You ask their employees, how does the employee referral program work? Who do you refer to? How much does it pay? Most of your employees can't even tell you. So you may be clear on it, but none of them are.
Yeah, and Jeff, I have a question on that because you hear
sure.
about employee referral programs and the big difference between theory and putting this into practice, where maybe it's just part of the handbook or some policy that gets posted, but like you said, never communicated. So is it really just a matter of putting this in place and actually, really executing upon it? Or do you need like employee referral software, or is it
No, you
just
don't
like,
need
hey,
any of
let's
this.
just
No.
let's just put a framework and just always get it out there in like the employee newsletter, for example?
Everyone overthinks this. They're like, oh, we need a SaaS platform, and they're worried they're going to be besieged by inbound uh, referrals. God forbid. I mean, that would be a high-class problem. It doesn't happen. Make it super simple for your people. Either set up an email box, referrals at whatever, or a simple page on your intranet, whatever it may be. Make it simple for your employee. Be generous, not so much in how you pay, but pay when the person is hired. Don't make them wait 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. That's not your employee's responsibility. They're just giving you great leads. It's your job to find those people and hire them. And if you hire them, do the payout. And again, the book talks through in a lot of detail how to structure the program. Okay, let's go to interviewing. And I'm going to slow down a little bit because this is where most people completely screw it up. So we've got our scorecard. We know what we're looking for. We've written a compelling job invitation, and we're going to get it in front of every person that we possibly can. And we're going to focus on employee referring and my referral network and your referral network, as opposed to posting and preying on some job board. Now we've got a candidate, and we're going to interview them. We've all interviewed as candidates. We've all probably interviewed as employers. And you will agree, I think, that this is the most ridiculous, painful, sloppy, and inefficient process. And until Elon Musk and AI solve this for us, we're going to be interviewing candidates. So you might as well do it the best you possibly can. What most people do is they completely waste the time with an unstructured interview. What I mean is they go through the motions, but they're not prepared. They don't think in advance about the questions they're going to ask. Data shows that if you just ask the same questions to every single candidate in structured interviews, you're halfway home. And that's what we're going to do. It doesn't even matter what questions you ask. If you just ask the same questions, you can then compare and contrast candidates. And the book gives you all the questions. There's no secret to that. I'm happy to give you my whole interview guide I've used for 25 years. That's not magic. It's not a secret. What is the secret is being disciplined, being prepared, taking careful notes, going through each role that the person has held to look for patterns. That is what identifies people. It's still not foolproof, because when this guy walks in the room or hops on Zoom with you and you're looking for a head of sales, this guy's straight out of central casting, right? He's good looking, he's got the haircut, he's confident. And what happens is all that preparation goes out the window. It is so easy to fool you, not because you're not bright, but because we're humans and we fall into something that is false perceptions. Our brain just looks to categorize people, right? Study after study shows that attractive people are perceived as being more intelligent and qualified. People who are taller have better leadership skills. That's why most US presidents are tall. Deeper voice means that you're stronger, more integrity. I didn't get any of these things, right? So the brain tries to kind of take these shortcuts, and it's called confirmation bias, right? You walk into the meeting, your brain decides in the first 60 seconds what you think of that candidate. And then you look for the next 59 minutes for data that reinforces your original hypothesis. Because as a human, you can't afford to be wrong. You can't stand being wrong. It agitates us, right? So instead, open your mind. Go in with as few preconceived notions, and I promise you'll be very surprised. I usually am surprised by 50% of candidates. In fact, I have a little game that I play, and I go through it in the book. But I basically, rather than trying to fight that first 60 seconds, I jot down really small what I think, thumbs up or thumbs down. And 50% of the time, I find that my original hypothesis was wrong. I look for data to support the opposite point of view, just like a great debater does. And I overturn my original assumption. There are three types of interviews we got to master. The first is the phone screen. I never jump into heavy interviews without a phone screen. I need to know in 20 minutes, is it likely that this person is even worth investing the time in? My interviews are not short. So if I'm going to spend time and my team's time, which is the most expensive asset that we have, that 20-minute phone screen better say, yeah, this person's worth the time. It's like a prospect for a prospective customer. And the book goes through what I'm covering in the phone screen, but I'll tell you up front, can I afford this person? Do they have a non-compete? Do they have at least a few of the critical DNA characteristics. So in 20 minutes, I can establish that. It's not perfect. It's not a reason to hire the person. It's just a reason to decide if they're even in the funnel. Second interview is the career deep dive. I usually recommend that be done by the hiring manager. And it's time consuming. It can take me 2 hours to do, but it's only done once. And then the other interviews are DNA interviews. Most people ask the same questions over and over. It's mind numbing for the candidate. You can imagine the candidate experience. Again, we're trying to sell and court top performers. How you interview tells them a lot about your process. So you got to think about that candidate experience. What are we focused on in these interviews? Most people get this completely wrong as well. They ask hypothetical questions. Well, Ben, what would you do if you joined us in your first 60 days? How the hell would Ben know? He doesn't know our company or industry. He doesn't know the job or culture. How do I assess that? What's far more predictive is how Ben has made decisions in the past, how he has gotten things done, and why he did those things versus other things he could have done. Why did he take the paths that he chose? That shows me his decision making, his judgment, his cognitive ability, which are highly predictive. Okay. So I'm focused on the past, not the future with this individual. It's just like a stock price. It's not 100% predictive, but it's a pretty good predictor if it's heading in the right direction. The problem is, everyone's lying to your face anyway. And so your job is to go through these interviews trying to uncover the truth. Now, we're going to use the test drive and reference checks to validate this stuff. But it's important to know that the resume is just a sales brochure and the job interview is just role play, right? And so the book goes through a bunch of techniques, which I won't go through now, of how to reduce the pressure, how to get your candidates not nervous. I don't want them nervous. I want them to reveal their true self. Most interviewers, they're focused on they everything they do makes the candidate nervous. I want them nice and relaxed so that they might reveal their true self. Okay, we've covered the top 5. We're going to go to number 6, and then I'm going to leave the rest to the book. And this is what you came for. This is the money. If you ignore everything I've talked about, please, let's focus on this. Number 6. So just as the interview is scientifically proven to be the least best predictor, the test drive is the single best predictor. I do not hire, and I don't let my clients hire anyone at any level and any role without a test drive. Before I move on, does anyone know what I'm talking about? Does anyone do test drives consistently in their company? Maybe give a thumbs up or some kind of
Let us know in chat. Yeah, I'm
flail
curious what this is,
your
Jeff.
hands.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the money, guys. Here we go. What most people do is they rely on interviews. Part of this is because they're so desperate and they're so behind because they didn't plan that as soon as they have a good interview, they're like, stop the process. We found our CMO. She's amazing. How fast can we get an offer letter to her? And they forget that interviews are notoriously bad predictors, and there's a 71% chance she lied to me throughout anyway. So don't stop the process. Instead, put your final 2 candidates through a test drive. What is a test drive? Well, would you buy a car without doing a test drive? Would you go to the car's website and believe everything they tell you and say, I'm going to buy this car and click purchase? No, you would take it on a test drive. You want to see how it handles under real world conditions. How are the brakes? How is the mileage? How does it feel? Too loose? Too tight? BMW's got a hard feel. Maybe I thought I wanted a sporty car, but it's got a hard feel. You need to test drive the car. You need to test drive the candidate. This has been proven in study after study to be the single best predictor. And it's no surprise why it is. If I'm seeing you in action for 2 hours, 4 hours, 2 days, whatever I can get, and seeing you doing the job, not job shadowing, that's selling, but actually doing the job, and I can witness you. I can see your competencies and I can see your DNA in action. There's no surprises. I know what I'm buying. If I hire you right after interviews, I'm hiring you based on what you told me your competencies and DNA are. It's 2 very different things. So this is the best predictor, but 90% of companies don't do it. So how do you design? Of course, how you design the test drive means everything. Test drive varies based on the role. It could be 2 hours, it could be 4 hours, it could be a day. Whatever you can muster from the candidate to invest the time with you is time well spent. It will help you avoid every bad hire. Excuse me. I'm so allergic to bad hiring that I started sneezing. Okay, the test drive. An example is solving a problem. Now, it is not, as many think, a case study. Unless you're a consulting firm that's hiring people to do case studies, then it's highly predictive. If you're a SaaS company, as an example, and you're hiring a sales rep, I want to see this. Oh my gosh. I'm so
Bless you.
sorry. One of you must be wearing cologne or something. I want to do a test drive on a sales rep that is comparable to the sales role I'm hiring that person to do. It's a different test drive for a controller that I'm hiring for the controller role. But if I can see them complete a project or solve a problem, a great example, which some of you may do, is a coding exercise or a coding test for a software developer. That's very common and it's great, right? As long as you structure it the right way, it can be a take-home assignment. I don't even care if they use Chat GPT because they're going to be using it in their next role. But there are some parameters. The book walks through how to do that. But that's just one type. For a sales role, a controller, a CFO, I've done it with CEOs. I see the person in action. I can see in a working session, are they defensive? Do they share our DNAs? How do they communicate? How do they think through a problem and reason through alternatives and narrow down those alternatives? And what data do they ask me for? Even preparing a little dossier in advance and giving it to them. This is not about tricking them, right? This is about a realistic, real world scenario to see the person in action. I even look for feedback from people that didn't interview them. So back when I used to have a company that was office based, we would ask our front office person, "Hey, what'd you think of these candidates?" And she was amazing because she would say, "This guy was a jackass. In the interviews, he was super nice, but he was rude, he was dismissive, and it was grounds for dismissal. We didn't even consider him." So you want to look for data that is outside of the interview process, and the test drive is the best way to do that. Now, you can really mess this up because you need to simulate the role as closely as possible. Sales role, controller,
It's like Jeff froze there a
right?
little.
Because you write the parameters down. Here's the problem or the test drive. It can even be a fictitious one, right? There's some problem you're facing or you think you're facing. Give them the data. Maybe leave a few things out so that they have to ask you for some data. That alone is telling because you see how they tackle a problem, how they think through it. I hate to say this, but even their ability to follow instructions, half of candidates can't even follow simple instructions and they submit a test drive or go through a test drive and you're like, this isn't even what we asked him to do. That tells you a lot about the individual because it's probably the best you're ever going to see of them. Now imagine you hire them. You're going to have to micromanage and babysit their behavior because they can't follow simple instructions. If you have to pay them for their time, do it. I'd say maybe 2% of candidates, require this, and I'm happy to pay them because it's money well spent. If I can avoid a bad hire, which costs you $50,000 at least, I'm happy to pay them $1,000 for their time. Some of you might be wondering, well, how can I possibly insult their intelligence by putting them through a test drive? First of all, don't call it a test drive, call it a working session and sell it to them as a benefit for them. They're going to see the company in action. They're going to get a chance to do the job for half a day, and we'll get a chance to see you in action for half a day. It's for both of our benefits. The best candidates, the ones who love performing, they will love doing this because they want to show you how great they are. They want to show you what they can do, and they want to reduce the risk of making a bad decision on their part. I've tracked it over time, and I've actually found it increases my offer acceptance rate. Okay, so we're going to pause just for a moment. We developed a scorecard. Half competency is ability to do the job, half DNA fit with my company. We developed a compelling messaging, which hopefully includes video, but the book talks about that. We tapped out my network, your network, our employees' network with a great employee referral program that we talk about till we're blue in the face. We interview the top candidates, hopefully referred by our employees. and then we put them through a test drive. The rest is covered in the book, and you're going to get that book for free, as Ben mentioned. All you have to do is go to recruitrockstars.com/book, and we will give you the whole book. And there's no secrets here. I love giving away the book. I don't need the 28 bucks that it sells for on Amazon, because it's already been a best-selling book. Now I'm trying to preach and evangelize the advantages of this. But I will tell you that this is simple, but it's not easy. This is time-consuming stuff. Now, it is less time-consuming than micromanaging and babysitting, right? So you're going to put in the time one way or the other. You're either going to recruit top performers, which takes you a ton of time, or you're going to recruit and keep B and C players, and you're going to spend your time micromanaging, putting them on probation, giving them feedback, babysitting them. So either way you're spending the time, I just find to scale your business successfully, why not put the time in on the front end? A little bit of slow to go fast, and the rest largely takes care of itself. And the final 4 chapters talk about how to manage these people, how to lead these people, etc. Now, because it is time consuming, we created a time-consuming done-for-you service. So you can either do it yourself. The book walks you through that. We've started to talk about that today. Ben's been very generous to provide a significant discount on this done-for-you service. And I'm going to briefly touch on it, and then we'll open it up for questions. The service is called Shortlist. And basically, that's what it does. It introduces you to a short list of 10 finalist candidates for any role in your company in 10 days, and it's 10 times less expensive than using a headhunter. So it's a low-cost, affordable way to finally get your hands on interested, qualified candidates without paying a recruiting firm. And the reason is job boards don't work anymore, and recruiters are often just too expensive. When you use a job board, 80% of the people you're trying to reach never see your job posting. So you're missing the passive candidate. And normally you'd pay a headhunter a ton of money. Headhunters charge 20 to 30% of first year compensation. So that's a lot of times out of the reach of a fast growing company. And that's why we created Shortlist for people that just don't have the time to do everything the book talks about. And it's a done for you service. And it introduces you to passive candidates, but finally at the price of a job board posting. We like to think of it as the holy grail. 300 companies use it. Most of them are venture funded or angel funded or private equity funded, fast growing companies. SaaS is our biggest category, but it works across any business. There's no magic to it because we introduce you to 10 people in 10 days. Each of them is qualified on paper. Each of them has said they're interested in talking with you about the role, and then you and your team take it from there. Still paying attention to the test drive, but at least it gets you, to the 20-yard line much, much faster. This is what a shortlist looks like. There's no software to learn. It's not a software tool. It's a totally done for you service. All you do is one thing. You click on view profile and then you click yes or no. Do you want to meet the person or not? They've already said they're interested. So it's kind of a two-way matchmaking system, right? Almost like a dating app for recruiting. It works for virtually any role that you can think of because we find these people in different places based on the role. Everything from LinkedIn to Facebook, Twitter, press releases, alumni directories, industry associations, blogs, etc. It works for any role in your business, accounting and finance, marketing, product management, HR, software development, of course, and it works at any level. Individual contributors, director, VP. We're doing 3 CEOs right now. Doesn't matter. Even independent board members. Let's say you want to add an independent board member who's an expert on SaaS for the food service industry. We'll introduce you to 10 in 10 days who are interested in joining your board. And it's always the same price, which I'll get to in a second. So it's a really effective tool. If you don't have time to do everything the book talks about, it's 10 times more targeted than a job board. It's 10 times faster than a recruiting firm. And it's 10 times less expensive. And that's even without the discount that Ben's put together for you. This is an example real quick. Michael Geller, number 2 guy at Risk Optics, a big SaaS company. They've raised, I think, 50 million in VC. He loves Shortlist. He says you fill out a form and 10 days later in your inbox are 10 people who want to talk to you about the job. There's no job posting. There's no unqualified applicants, etc. So it's headhunters and recruiting firms are not too happy that we've launched this, but we're kind of disintermediating that industry. So think about what you typically pay a recruiting firm. usually 25% of the first year compensation. So you're hiring a controller, she's going to make $150. That's a 30,000 fee to a headhunter. I'd rather see you put that 30,000 into her compensation and hire a much better person than you could afford otherwise. Why put that money into the pocket of an intermediary? And so shortlist cost about 10 times less. It's $4,000 for any role, any level, guaranteed to meet 10 qualified interested people in 10 days. So it's a really, really great value at 4,000. But working with Ben, we put together a deal where you're going to get your first shortlist for half off. It's only 2,000. So about what you'd spend on LinkedIn or a bunch of job boards, except here you're going to get passive candidates who are interested in talking with you. On paper, they're qualified, and you can jump right to the interviews and the test drive. It's going to save you many, many, many hours for $2,000. So the way to do it is simply to go to this link after the call, of course, recruitrockstars.com/the SaaS CFO. And by the way, if you're not a SaaS company, that's fine too. Still going to get the 50% off $2,000 price. The discount is reflected right in the checkout cart, and you just fill out the form and you're good to go. And it's quite amazing. We've done about 2,000 shortlists now, and our placement rate is very high, and it works, like I said, across virtually any role in your business. So that's the special deal that Ben and I put together. But I'd love to open it up for Q&A, Ben, if that's okay.
Yeah, Jeff.
And
Yeah, we've got
I'm
some
happy to
questions
stay on
here.
as long as you like.
Yeah, so appreciate that. Of course, I love deals. I have SaaS clients right now paying 20, 30, 40,000 to place folks. And, so of course this resonated with me as a CFO, but let's throw some questions in the chat. And I'm going to start from the bottom up.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So Kyle asked, with COVID and remote work, there has been a growth in outsourcing entry mid-level talent, India, Romania, Central South America, for example. What is your take on this trend? When would you look into these options, when not?
Yeah, it is a big trend. It is a real trend. I mean, it does make sense in some roles. I do it in parts of my business, and then parts of my business, I definitely wouldn't do it. So I think the question he had is, when do you do it? When don't you do it?
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes a really honest assessment of what are the core competencies that your business needs to keep within its four walls, virtually four walls. Um, if you're an ad agency, just as a random example, I would say copywriting and the creative output is a core competency of that firm, right? And outsourcing it to a stranger halfway around the world is probably not a great idea, because you're never going to build the intellectual capital, that core competence. It's like a muscle that you develop over time. If you're going to have on a project basis coming and going, I probably wouldn't do that. But if I'm an ad agency, finance is probably not a core competency. I probably could outsource that, as an example, right? If I'm a SaaS platform and I need to embed myself deeply with refrigeration experts, because we've developed the leading SaaS platform for food refrigeration, I'm probably not going to outsource my lead gen. I'm probably going to want to keep that in house. But maybe part of the lead gen, which is just developing lists of people to go after, that could probably be outsourced, and I could probably do it 80% less expensive overseas. So you really got to start with, okay, what are the core competencies that we need to build in our company? And if it's in that category, you keep it in-house, even if it's remote. As employees, as career paths, you also got to think one last thing, Ben, about younger people who are up and coming. They need to be fostered and trained and developed, and that's time that you're investing. And so, if there's a role where you need to invest that time, you want to keep those people in-house. Otherwise, you're going to keep training, keep
Yeah.
explaining things.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we got a couple minutes left here, but Jim
Yeah,
has
let's
a
do it.
question about test drives. And he says, we find some candidates are reticent, especially techies, to coding challenges. Any suggestions for when and how to work that into the conversation?
A great question. And the book talks a lot about this in chapter 6. Number 1, set the expectation on the very first call by saying, here's the process that we're going to go through. We take talent very seriously. You're going to meet with Bob, the hiring manager. You're going to meet with 3 people in the company so you can hear different perspectives. And then finally, before we do reference checks, we're going to do a working session. Don't call it a test drive. That sounds arrogant. We're going to do a working session for 3 hours on blah, blah, blah. So set the expectation. Then when the time comes, you've got to sell. First of all, when the time comes, they should be pretty engaged. It's like a fish. They should be really on the hook, salivating to do the role. If they're not, you need to stop and figure out why not. Are they just not engaged? Are they too busy? Or is this not a good match, right? Don't force the test drive down their throat. Then you got to sell the test drive by explaining that they're going to benefit by seeing you, the team, in action. So it is a two-way look, right? It's like you wouldn't get married without going to coffee, then lunch, then dinner, then trips, and whatever. It's really no different. You want to do that before the offer is made, not on the Monday after the offer is made, and then find out we both made the biggest career mistake of our lives. So you got to sell it properly. The book talks about how to do that.
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, any last questions, throw them in chat. We're going to wrap up here shortly, running out of time, of course, but I'm sure we could go on for hours here. Great class on recruiting here. Diego had a question on cover letters. And I still remember when I printed off my resumes, printed cover letters, put a stamp on them, put them in the mail, and kind of hope that someone would respond. Are cover letters even relevant in today's recruiting situation?
My personal opinion is no. I know there are a few people that do use them and rely on them, and unfortunately, first of all, ChatGPT has made them just useless. But even before that, even before 3 weeks ago, they're usually cut and paste, copy and paste. Now, a compelling, short, differentiated, personalized cover letter that's 5 sentences that gets my attention, that's different. That's something that I will pay attention to. But the 3 paragraph bullet point summary of the resume, I don't even spend time. And I've interviewed probably 30, 40,000 people over my career. They just don't. They're kind of vestige of the past.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense to me. But yeah, so any last questions here, throw them in chat or raise your hand. I can unmute you. But yeah, we'll take one more question here if there's one. If not, Jeff, really appreciate your time. This was great. A lot of this stuff resonated with me today, as far as your process. So, and make sure everyone grabs that PDF book. I think that'll be a nice resource for everybody. So last call for a question. If not, let's see. We'll wrap up here today.
I'll just say
yeah,
one
thanks, Marty.
thing.
Thanks. Yeah, Jeff.
Are there any last questions, Ben?
Looks like we're good. So yeah, we'll wrap it up here.
So again, let me just end where we started. I'm 55. I've scaled and built 4 companies and sold 3 of them. I've raised 55 million in VC, and I can tell you that every minute that you put into building your team, recruiting, retaining, training, developing the people part of your business, over product market fit, raising capital, marketing campaigns, perfecting your logo, going to conferences. This is it. If you don't get this right, all that stuff, you don't have a chance. If you do get this stuff, you get a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, and it becomes self-reinforcing. I've seen companies transformed in 3 or 6 months. You start attracting a few rock stars, it begets success. Rockstars attract rockstars. You exit the B players out of your company, you will become unstoppable. Even if it means you have to pay a little bit more, the way to do that is by having fewer people on your team. I like to say, just like Steve Jobs did, find 5 people, pay them like 8, and you'll get the results of 20. So don't be stingy on paying. And if that means you have to let go of some of your B and C players to free up the capital to do that, do it all day long. It was nice to see you all.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks. Appreciate it. We'll wrap it up here, Jeff. That was great. An email will go out with the PDF link again, and we'll also have the video replay available in my Academy in the No Fluff course series. So appreciate it. And it looks like I'll see Jeff. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I know you had a question, but Jeff, do you want to? Do we want to share your email at all here? Or?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Ready? It's super easy.
Yeah.
It's Jeff@recruitrockstars.com. So it's my name, Jeff. And then the book title, Recruit Rockstars, all one word.com. Email me any questions, anything you want to know.
Okay, perfect. Jeff@recruitrockstars.com. If you have any more questions, reach out to Jeff. Really appreciate your time today, Jeff, and sharing all this information. It was fantastic.
My pleasure. Thanks all. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Take care, guys.